Alright, I don't know about the lot of you. This is shaping up to be a coffee morning. Good morning and welcome back to another Pure Theorycrafting for Marvel Avengers Alliance 2. This morning we're going to do something a little bit different than the others. We're going to look at a character who's surprisingly common. Instead, because of complex mechanics, even many of those who own him haven't used him. We're talking Moon Knight, the lunar lunatic, who's just as every bit across the board as you would expect him to be. Now, Moon Knight's going to involve a few conceptual explanations as we go through. We're going to have to discuss a couple of mechanics and the differences between them to understand why I value certain things but don't value others. Let me give you a little bit of background on Moon Knight. He's not a PvP reward. He's not the Chapter 3 heroic reward that Nebula was. He doesn't require anything special to get him. He is, in fact, a one-star hero that you can get exceptionally early on from superior power cells. And in my case, he was maybe the fourth or fifth character that I drew from superior power cells. He was one of the very first heroes that I had, but not early enough for me to really make use of him at those low levels. I already have my starting team. I got in a tank. I was still missing a healer. He wasn't going to take those early resources because I had no idea really how to build him. I looked at him and was so utterly baffled that I kind of just left him sitting on the bench. He was one of the very first characters that I unlocked. He was maybe my 10th or 12th level 30 character. He sat there for quite some time until I had the chance to better understand free attacks and similar mechanics in this game. The need for a tank, what characters can tank, things along those lines. And now that I've had the chance to really try him out, to fully understand what he has going on for him, he's going to be one of my first 4-star characters, hands down. He needs, if you can tell by the lowered amount of AP up in the corner, he really only needs like another 1,000 or 2 AP to get those last couple of abilities up to 3-star, and that's one of those 4-star challenges that everybody has. You have to 3-star 5 abilities. That's often the last task that I have. I've got a few characters who are at that point too. Moon Knight is getting those resources before they do because I use him in so many different ways. He's a highly adaptable character. Now, because there's no need for an explanation for PvP or anything like that, we're going to go straight into him. He's right here. He's up at the top. I've got him at 30 and 3 stars. You can see that exclamation point on equip. Once again, I've taken off the EISOs so that we can look at the base stats first and then look at the EISO slots afterwards. Take a look at those stats. They're exceedingly balanced. In that last video I did just last night for Agent 13, I kind of discussed, and maybe I did it in the no video, in one of those two, I discussed the fact that I feel that stats vary between one of 5 distinct levels, and I don't think that Moon Knight is very low or very high in any stat. His health, his attack, above average. Speed, defense, average. Accuracy, evasion, a little below average. But there's only about 150, 175 point difference between his highest and his lowest base stats. He is exceedingly averaged across the board, and that is off-putting. This is a game that does not cater to balanced hybrid characters. This is a game where your team should be balanced, but that your team is more effective by having individuals specialize. Have your protector focus on defense or evasion. Don't focus them on damage. Ignore it completely. It doesn't matter if they're somewhat slow, if there's a time gap between their turns. As long as that protecting debuff never drops, they're fulfilling their role. Your healer needs to have 1 or 2 heal abilities equipped. He needs to heal on demand if possible. If he does some damage in between, that's fantastic. That's one of the reasons that Iron Fist is such a great healer compared to, say, Spider-Woman, whose heal is maybe not quite so on demand. Even if she can do some decent damage out of it, outside of that, Iron Fist really does that on-demand snap heal as needed. Damaging characters, you can build them for pure offense, high speed, high accuracy, high attack, and really compound the damage that they deal by neglecting their defense because you have somebody else to cover for that. Hybrid characters do not excel in that kind of a build. They don't have the defense of a tank. They don't have the offense of a DPS character unless they have a niche. Unless they have something that they do that is so effective by itself that they can fill that role, that they can always bring that to the table no matter how you build them. Support tacticians kind of fall under that. Although I do class support as its own particular role, they make the team better in their own way. In this particular game, I lump a healer like Iron Fist under the support role. Um, his buff that he brings to the team is being able to keep the tank's health high. So even if he's not increasing everybody's damage, or even if he's not um, debuffing the enemies with powerful damage over time, if he's not, a healer doesn't help you kill the enemies faster. They let you survive the fact that it takes longer to kill them. So I still qualify healer as a support role, mostly due to the lack of healers. Moon Knight has a niche. He has something that he does so powerfully that he can be brought in as a damage dealer and stand there with the best of them, even with his hybrid style build. And that niche is an exceptionally powerful, utterly unique free attack. Now, everybody has free attacks. Why are we calling this unique? The reason is that Moon Knight has two. He has two completely separate free attacks that do not cross over in any way, shape, or form. He has what I would refer to maybe as the natural free attack, the free attack that everybody has. This is the free attack triggered by the coordinated EISO. It's triggered by Frenzied. It's triggered by, not flanked, flat-footed. It's triggered when somebody else uses a leading strike, Overwatch. Anything that brings out that free attack in other characters. Moon Knight has one of those too. Everybody has one. Even if they can't normally use a free attack themselves, everybody has one because they can all be affected by those buffs and gain a free attack that way. What makes Moon Knight different is that his passive grants a free attack that uses a different one. And that free attack that's unique to his passive, down to Lunatic, we'll scroll down just a second and really get into this. That free attack, it's a different type. It's tagged completely differently. Its damage scaling is different. It benefits from a different debuff. Nothing about it is the same as that natural free attack that he has. Now, most characters that use a free attack as part of their natural build, Iron Fist preemptive counter, Star-Lord's follow-up on anybody's attack, Luke Cage, or say She-Hulk, who have an ability that immediately triggers 2 or 3 free attacks, even the basic Hawkeye with his rapid shot. The free attacks they use for those are their standard natural free attacks that they use for everything. For Moon Knight, that is not the case, and so last night, I sat down, I spent 10, 15 gold and a whole pile of energy on refreshes, and what I did was I went into Chapter 3, Hard Mode, Mission 2, Battle 2, the fight against the mini-boss fight against Wraith, because the very first wave in there has a Cronin. Now, those who pay attention to the names of the enemies, and I don't know why you would really pay attention to the names of the grunts, Cronins are the big aliens that automatically activate tenacity. This makes them punching bags for testing. The stats do not change between your hero and the enemy. You're fighting the same enemy, hitting them with the same attacks multiple times, and by pairing that with a character who can bring stun, this let me change only 1 or 2 buffs per round as I did this testing, and then if when the Chrono finally died, I exited and restarted the battle. Waste of energy, maybe. A lot of testing was done on his free attacks. Why am I going to this before we even get to the abilities? Because it affects his passive, and that is massive. All right, quick thing on his leadership bonus before I go past it and forget all about it. 10% accuracy, 10% health. We will find as we get to the back that as we get to the end of the video and his EISO slots, his health is obscenely high. In part because he's a bruiser, but it's high even for a bruiser. The fact that he also increases accuracy by 10%, that's his lowest offensive stat. By bringing that back up, you still see that hybrid balancing effect in play. Let's take a look down at his passive. We'll go over them, and then I will explain the differences between his two free attacks and why they matter. Let me scroll a little bit lower. Let's take a look real fast. You see how it drops back? There's a bug on the Windows 10. It actually repeats his profile screen like 3 times. But you'll notice that there's no resource here. It hits his passive, it explains his passive, and then goes to bio. Moon Knight has no resources, and he has no abilities with natural cooldowns. He can use any ability any turn and is limited only by the speed of the ability. This gives him an extreme amount of flexibility, even with the 3 that he brings, because much like Nova, he can tailor it to specific aspects. Unlike Nova, he has 4. And where during the Nova video I explained that it's best to bring a move tailored to each of his assists granted by the Xandarian Warmind, the World Mind. With Nova, all those separate assists do is make his abilities more efficient so that he doesn't have to recharge. They do not necessarily change his playstyle. He's still an offensive blaster. Moon Knight's aspect can utterly change what you do with him for that round. Defender is the first one that pops up, and if you pay close attention, you'll notice that Moon Knight always starts the fight with Defender. Until he gets his first turn and his aspect changes, he will start the fight with Defender up. Make note of this for those of you who really love PvP. If you see him, until he gets a turn, he's going to counterattack the very first attack you make on him. Defender counters 1 attack while in Defender aspect. That very first attack that lands on him will erase the aspect. The Defender aspect goes away once that counterattack is triggered. And we stress this because when you're using him, especially with a free attack team or a counterattack team, if the enemy who triggers Defender dies before you get to counterattack, your counterattack is still wasted. Watcher, free attack after the next range attack. He only has 1. He has 1, and it's kind of unique. We'll get into that as we get into abilities and plays to that hybrid role and his ability to switch around. But it does cause him to do his follow-up when he does a range attack. Pathfinder. He gains a free attack after the next melee attack. This is your highest burst of damage. Defender grants you a counterattack if you're the one who takes the hit. Watcher lets you use his range attack. You'll see as we get into that ability that is not necessarily a high damage ability. It's used for a different purpose. Pathfinder, his most powerful attacks are melee, and they can hit exceptionally hard because many of them benefit from something that grants them plus 50% damage even beyond the base damage. And then Pathfinder granting one of those strong follow-up attacks immediately thereafter. It's kind of it's a pretty big aspect. When you see that, that's the turn that you're going to kill something. The Embracer aspect. His non-attack actions. This can be a buff, this can be a debuff, this can be his tactical. Anything that doesn't have a listed damage number will trigger Embracer. And this will restore his health. I've seen some comments early on in Reddit. I've not seen a whole ton of them recently. I think people are starting to grow to like him more. Either that or the ones who have decided that they don't like him aren't touching him, and so they aren't making any further comments. I've seen some people complain that Embracer is just not that high of a heal, mostly in reference to PvP, where they can't heal 50% of a character's health like Iron Fist tends to, but they're discounting the sheer amount of health that Moon Knight has. Embracer just this morning for me was something like an 850 point heal. That is even with a high health, that's often up to about 20% of his overall health at a given point in time. Uh, Pair that with his tactical, which as we'll see is a shield, even if it's not a big shield, like 400, 450 points, that is a 30% increase in his survivability. 20% of his health, 10% of his health as a shield, and they work together. So that even if he's only lost maybe 15 or 17% of his health, Embracer will bring him back up to full or close to it. And then that shield on top of it means that the excess effective life isn't lost. It is a very big survivability tool for him, and we'll see why he needs that. He kind of relies on it in a lot of ways. We can already tell from these different aspects they really can change his individual playstyle, and it looks like he wouldn't build towards just one thing, and in that we're correct. Moon Knight has the ability. He has two abilities that cause him to tank, and two fairly high damaging moves that exploit that with Guardian Maneuver. He also has two abilities that cause him to enter stealth. Now he doesn't necessarily have a stealthy maneuver, but there's a reason that we can pair those together. He has a team-wide debuff. That it's one of his protect moves, but it puts a debuff on all the enemies. He has a team-wide buff that puts him into stealth. He has with Embracer he can self-heal. With his tactical he can self-shield. But his niche will always be that powerful counterattack. Does this sound like it would be very hard to focus him in any one way? Oh, yeah. And we'll get into that with the builds. Moon Knight is all over the place. He's a fairly complex character. That's the real purpose of this video. We need to decipher him. And first, we need to take a look at that free attack granted by this passive on the first screen. Now, I've already said that he's got two. His natural free attack is called Crescent Counter, and it follows his ranged attacks animation. It is a ranged move, and with a significant amount of testing last night, I was able to determine not only does it benefit from Sharpshooter, but by bringing in Gamora, I was able to tell that since it triggers bleed, even if it doesn't apply it, it is a ranged sharp attack. Tellingly, it doesn't apply any debuff, specifically Clobbered. This is important. And it's important when we get to his innate, because his innate causes all free attacks to apply Clobbered and gain a 25% damage boost. While it says all free attacks, if his natural free attack, if Crescent Counter, does not gain the benefit of applying Clobbered, then why would it gain the other half of that same passive? My guess is that innate. My guess is that innate does not apply to Crescent Counter at all. And I saw this with the damage being dealt against those Cronin enemies, with nothing else being used on him. I was able to see it do roughly a 1,500 point crit. Now this is a level 30 3-star ability, 3-star character versus like a level 27 bruiser with fairly high defense. I was still going to hit him fairly hard. But it was about a 1,500 point crit, a 2,000 point devastate. That gives you a number scale. One of the reasons I chose the level 27 version is because the number differences are exaggerated. We can see real differences in attacks. Immediately using Pathfinder. No other buff on Moon Knight. No damage increaser. Nothing on the opponent. The only change is that I've switched from Crescent Counter to his bonus free attack that comes from his passive, which is called Lunar Punishment. This is a melee unarmed. It's a single solid punch, so it needs to be able to land, but it hits ridiculously hard. 2,500 devastate, 4,000 crit. That is base. That is unbuffed against that exact same enemy, and that makes it over twice as strong as Crescent Counter. It also immediately applies Clobbered 100% of the time. If it lands, if it doesn't glance, if it lands, it's going to apply Clobbered. And it's going to do so because of his innate, not because of the counter itself. So it doesn't start applying Clobbered until level 20. Again, a little bit different from other people's free attacks. The big thing is just how strong it is. Lunar Punishment is well over twice as powerful as Crescent Counter. And it gets even stronger when he's already applied Clobbered. And given that his most powerful attacks are melee unarmed, all of his melee attacks save one are melee unarmed, and it shows. Those are his offensive moves, and we'll get into that with his abilities. That's the very next thing we're going to do. But the reason that I stress this, we'll get into this again with the EISOs. We're going to touch on his free attacks constantly. This is his specialty. Percentage bonuses stack additively. The 25% from Clobbered is added to the 25% increased damage from his innate. It's added to the 75% increased damage from off balance, and that off balance bonus is very important. And the reason being is that since Lunar Punishment and Crescent Counter are both increased by off balance, the game does recognize both of them as free attacks. Among his EISO sets, I'm going to go into this a little more in depth when we get over to those. I am convinced that math for math, because of the nature of his unique play style and the way he switches between a tank role to a DPS role to something else, Coordinated is a very bad set for him. Belligerent, the plus 50% bonus to free attacks, is equal, if not better, because of the sheer power difference in Lunar Punishment. It takes up less EISO slots, but in terms of raw damage, it should be just as high. Because it increases free attack damage, and because off balance affects Lunar Punishment, putting off balance on the enemy using Age of Ultron Black Widow, I then immediately watched it go from a 5,500 point Devastate to an 8,000 point Devastate. No other buffs. No change in buffs for him. It was that exact same enemy. I stunned him, and then immediately put off balance, and then just basically hit him again. That is a massive power difference, and it's going to change how you EISO him down the line. Let's take a look at his abilities. Moon Knight has 8, and they are all over the board. You can kind of see how I've got him running there. I use him with a very specific combination build. Let's start with his first 1-star ability, Nightclub. This is his melee blunt. This is his only off the top of my head, this is his only melee blunt. I might have that wrong as we go through the list. I really don't think I do. That's not important, because this move is used to apply protecting. Now, as it levels up at 4-star, it does become a fast move. And unlike a lot of other tanks, his protection moves have no cooldown. He can throw them up whenever he needs to refresh protect, or whenever protect simply isn't up in the first place, he can throw it up there, no cooldown, no need to wait, nothing big there. He does apply Demoralize with it. That's a great defensive buff, because he's immediately put up protecting. He's got to have a way to survive the immediate follow-up hit. Odds are you're using Nightclub because the defender, because either Defender or Pathfinder popped up. And if Defender is your aspect of the turn and you want to do the counter on that hit, you need to be able to take the hit. You want Demoralize to stick so that you can take that shot and shrug it off. Now, Demoralize is 50% base. That goes up to 80 at 3-star. Moon Knight is not necessarily a great candidate for the experimental EISO set. There are others that he'll use better. He's not a primary debuffer, and so making sure that his debuffs hit 100%, not so big of a deal, really. 80% of the time, he's going to stick Demoralized, and you know what? That's good enough. That's okay. We can work with that. This is a normal move. It does go up to fast. 170 for a fast move. That's not bad. We'll take that. That works just fine. Especially when he gives Protect as well. That is useful. Moon Knight has no other ability to increase his defense by default. The plus 20% from Protecting, that's it. That's all he gets. Let's take a look at Crescent Dart. Crescent Dart is his only ranged attack. Just like Crescent Counter, that natural free attack he has, this is ranged sharp. Now, I've got it at 2-star. I've already spent the points to get it up to 3-star. I just need to go use it a few more times. Take note that it applies Stealthy. Even at 1-star, Stealthy is applied. This is a plus 20 to his attack. This is the natural counterpart to Protecting. Instead of making yourself the target of every attack and increasing your defense by 20%, you make yourself unavailable to be targeted and increase your attack by 20%. Moon Knight flips back and forth between the two. He's the only real tank who can. Minor wounding, up to a maximum of 80%, light damage over time. This is not a high damage move. Again, it gets up to about 170. It's a fast move at 3-star. As soon as I finish leveling this up, it'll be fast star for me. It'll be a fast move for me. And its big use is to benefit from the from the watcher aspect for the turn, to grant him that lunar punishment follow-up attack. We'll see with the builds that this is a move that he might forego. He might not bring this in there depending on how you're using him, and the watcher aspect may be one that you simply don't use when it pops up. But we'll get to that as we get to builds. Lunar Legionnaire. Lunar Legionnaire is the base animation behind Lunar Punishment. It is a single heavy hit. Guardian Maneuver, plus 50% damage when the attacker is protecting. It is meant to be used with Nightclub. You usually get them both right off the bat. It's a candidate for Pathfinder as an aspect, and that's the only one that really benefits this. It doesn't add protecting, it's not ranged, and it's an offensive. It has a damage rating, so it's an attack, which is why the tag actually does say attack. That is a required word in there. So it's not going to trigger Embracer. It is slow speed. You can tell that I've not leveled it up. It does go up to normal speed, but 265 for a normal attack that can naturally flank and do plus 50% damage. This is a pretty strong hit. It only hits once. You want to make sure it lands. But with Pathfinder as the follow-up attack, he essentially punches twice, and it's pretty powerful. And I kind of think that that is the reason right there, that 265 damage. If Lunar Punishment copies that in any way, shape, or form, it might explain the higher base damage coefficient that Lunar Punishment uses over Crescent Counter. Fight or Flight, you'll see that I've got this one. I've got it up to 3 stars. This is a debuff and buff move, not an attack, but it's his second protection ability. 80% chance to apply Intimidated to the enemy line. That is a mental debuff. That'll become important here in just a second. Intimidated lowers the enemy's offense and their defense, which is great because you need to make use of Moon Knight's average accuracy, but also his relatively average defenses. Intimidated makes the enemies a little less dangerous to him, especially on a round where he's throwing Protect. This is a fast move. At 4-star, it's very fast. He can trigger this all the time because it is buff and debuff, but not an attack. This will trigger the Embracer heal. It will also makes for a great setup for his Defender counterattack. Two-star abilities, Strike Fear. This is actually why that mental debuff becomes important. Exploit Turmoil. Plus 50% chance, plus 50% damage if the target has a mental debuff. This does not require him to be protecting to gain that damage bonus. It has a different requirement. Of the 3 truly offensive damaging melee unarmed attacks he has, this is the only one that's not a Guardian Maneuver. Doesn't require him to be protecting to gain the damage bonus. If you run a team that uses Intimidate, that has mental debuffs, you can use that to boost this attack without too much of a problem. By default, Seeking. We saw that Lunar Legionnaire has the ability to bypass protection by default. This ability bypasses stealth by default. At 3-star, 265 damage, that means at 4-star it's already 332. Now this ability is slow, never gets faster. Why do we not care too much that it's a slow speed? Because it's unarmed. And his counter, his follow-up, applies Clobbered. Now if you're going to use this, pair it with a team that can apply Clobbered. There's several different characters who can do that. Luke Cage and Iron Fist, probably the most famous. But several versions of Cap can apply it. Age of Ultron, Black Widow. There are several support characters who can apply Clobber to the enemy line, and as soon as they do, this becomes about the equivalent of a normal speed attack at 332 damage. With that plus 50% damage, can already target stealthy. This is a pretty high offense move, and that's what it's meant to be used for. It really only benefits from Pathfinder. It can be used on a round where you have, say, Defender, where it doesn't matter what you do because it's not manually activated. But again, pure offense. All right, Khonshu's Blessing. Buff. This is a team-wide buff. Specifically, it's a team-wide confident buff. And remember what I said about he's not a good candidate for the experimental ISO? This is why. It starts at 70, not 50, and therefore at 3-star reaches a 100% application chance for your entire team. It's already fast. At 4-star, that becomes very fast. This can be used. It does cause him to enter stealth. So this buffs him on top of his confident abilities. This can be used during Embracer aspect for a heal and stealth and confident to the entire line on a very fast move. As far as team buffs go, that's not bad. I like that. That's pretty good. If you're going to bring him as a DPS role, this will probably be your best way to trigger Embracer. Let's take a look at the 2-star ability that I don't have and have never bothered to get. Melee and arms, speed normal, never gets faster. Because of that tendency to work well with Clobbered, this can be a fairly fast attack. Up to 4-star, it is 225 damage. You know what, 225 on a normal attack, I can work with that. That's okay. But it's a debuff move. Susceptible, mental debuff, dazed, mental debuff. Again, they work pretty well if you pair it with his other, with Strike Fear to get that 50% damage increase. But that's 2 Pathfinder moves. And he's not a great debuffer. If you're going to bring a character to apply debuffs, there's better options. Susceptible, always good. Dazed, good survivability debuff. These are not bad debuffs, but because they can only be applied to one enemy, it's just not something that I bring to the table myself. Other people, depending on their team setup, they may find a good use for it. For myself, I don't use it based almost purely on team composition. His 3-star ability. Speed slow, doesn't get faster. Melee unarmed, damage is 298, doesn't break 300, still very strong, and it gets stronger. Guardian Maneuver, plus 50% damage when he's protecting. That's what this is meant to be paired with. Brutal, each time this attack crits, the damage of all subsequent hits is increased. This is something like a 7 or an 8 hit combo. He hits a lot for this. Usually for a few hundred on every hit, that translates to several thousand over the course of the fight. 2,000 or 3,000 points. This is a strong damage dealing move. If you follow this with Pathfinder, even without the Guardian Maneuver, if his accuracy is high enough, especially say that confident buff that he gave with Khonshu's Blessing, if his accuracy is high enough, Brutal will make up for a lot of the damage loss of not having Guardian Maneuver. If you have the two of them together, this is a very large chunk of damage, even against difficult opponents. It is part of my core lineup because I do occasionally use him as a tank. Specifically, I allow him to have his protection buff up for a few turns at a time so that he can take some of the hits. Let's take a look at the tactical and innate. I've already touched on these. Shield, small amount of damage. It's not a very big shield. So a lot of people call this weak. If you can only apply a small amount of shield, a small shield to yourself as a tactical, then that's a weak tactical. Well, the thing is like Agent 13, it's meant to be used tactically. His abilities don't have cooldowns. His abilities don't have resource costs. This means that you're never forced to use his tactical. He, unlike characters with an ammunition or a power or a stamina requirement, there's never a point where he has to resort to this to bypass a turn. And this means that you want to save Carbonadium and Reinforcement specifically for Embracer. We've already seen that a lot of Moon Knight's, especially his buff and debuff moves, can be sped up all the way to very fast. He's got 3 or so of them that can be very fast. These counterattack his relatively average speed in order to get him several turns, because every time his turn comes around, it refreshes his aspect. If he's used up his defender buff, it lets him get a chance at a new one. Throw Carbonadium Reinforcement whenever you get Embracer, and you're going to see 20% of his health and 10% of his health in shields appear at the same time. That's a very strong defensive tactical on a character whose defenses are otherwise a little bit lacking for someone who uses Protect. Um, Much like a character like, say, She-Hulk, who has the ability to Protect, She-Hulk is like pure offense. She doesn't really build her defense that same way. This is Moon Knight's survival trick, since he can't actually increase his defense stat on his own. Avatar of Vengeance. Free attacks do plus 25% damage and apply Clobbered. I have seen nothing that indicates this affects Crescent Counter. It definitely doesn't apply Clobbered. I don't know why it would gain the plus 25% damage if it doesn't gain the second effect. Why would it only do one and not the other? It definitely still lands. Lunar Punishment, however, will apply Clobbered on every hit, as well as simply doing a much higher damage. Percentage bonuses percentage bonuses stack additively. This plus off balanced will double the base damage of Lunar Punishment that is already very high. This is the reason why free attack. This is a large part of the reason why free attacks are such a big deal to him. Remember, he starts the fight with Defender up. The first enemy who hits him, even before he gets his turn, is going to get Clobbered applied to them as long as he hits, and his accuracy isn't bad. He lands attacks pretty respectably. As soon as he puts Clobbered up there, all those different slow and normal speed melee attacks, yeah, they're going to get faster. Because with the exception of that very first one that applies Protect, that already starts at that's already at fast speed, all of his others are unarmed, and they benefit. So we've looked over this. We've really gone into depth on his free attacks and the hour or two of just solid testing I did specifically on his free attacks. Why Lunar Punishment is simply so much better than Crescent Counter. This is important because we're going to roll into his EISOs now. Now, Moon Knight's EISOs, 4 green, those are health, 2 red attack, 1 yellow accuracy, 1 white speed, no defense, no evasion. He doesn't boost his defensive stats. Instead, he stacks health like nobody's business. Those who read the post that I sent out just this morning, where I was testing the math on scaling abilities like Desperate Attack or the Unyielding buff that the Civil War Captain America can give that scales defense based on the amount of health lost. Moon Knight pairs really well with Civil War Cap. I've been using the two of them in tandem. Cap's ability to take half the damage that Moon Knight does, and the fact that Covered works really well with, like, synergizes really well with shields. It's possible that when Moon Knight has Defender up, that as soon as they tap Moon Knight once, they're getting counterattacks by both. And Moon Knight's very high health really benefits from health scaling moves. He can lose a lot of health, still have a lot of health left. In some of those screenshots that I put in there up on Imager for that particular post, I did point out that my apologies. I did point out that Moon Knight shows up with like 5,000 health. Talking too much for the morning. Had to take a quick drink. Sorry about that. Sorry about the choking. Let's hope I don't die in the middle of making these videos. There are so many characters left to do. Let's go over set bonuses real fast. His health breaks 5,000, but he doesn't really benefit from any kind of a defense boost. Let's give him something survivability based. Because of his tendency to recover 20% of his health, plus giving him 10% of that health in shields, Impenetrable is immensely powerful on him. It's not too hard with 1 or 2 Embracer aspects back to back, and those happen a lot, that he immediately jumps back up into his upper 90% range, and if he triggers Embracer by throwing his tactical to get the shield, you've got to break through a lot of health just to get him out of that top 90%. The way Impenetrable works, with the taking half health damage over 90%, they have to do 20% of your health to break through the first 10%. His shield is about equal to that same 10% value. And because of that, because it's doubled by impenetrable, they have to do 40% of that really high health pool just to break him through that top 90% and hope that he doesn't pop Embracer and immediately put up another shield and make him do it again. This gives him more survivability than you might think. This can be compounded by giving him barricading, activating an emergency shield at 50% health that is larger than what his tactical gives, but can then be replaced by his tactical when it drops, gives him time to trigger those Embracer aspects and get him back up to full health. At least back up to over 90%. This causes his health to fluctuate a little bit over the course of the combat. Still, very powerful as a combination for him. Once again, I do not recommend rejuvenating for him. Unlike Wasp, who only really takes glancing moves and therefore doesn't lose a whole ton of health at any one point in time, or Luke Cage, who has an even more powerful damage reduction above 90%, and therefore it usually takes multiple shots to get him down below it, rejuvenating isn't all that powerful on Moon Knight. He's either not taking a lot of damage, and therefore he can replenish it all with Embracer, which remember occurs 1 in every 4 rounds roughly, and still heals 20% of his health. Rejuvenating for a character with 4.5 to 5,000 health when fully ISO'd, it just doesn't heal fast enough. It's like 2, maybe 3% of his total health when it ticks, and it usually, and I mean, that makes it like, in the terms of number of turns, it's not even as efficient as Embracer is. Don't waste your slots on it. Give him impenetrable, give him barricading, call it good for the defense side, and use the other 4 on the belligerent set. Now, why belligerent instead of coordinated when he's got the free attack bonuses? Because we've already seen that because I've seen through testing that it doesn't look like his big free attack bonus and his really powerful free attack, they don't benefit from it. Coordinated triggers Crescent Counter. And it will always trigger Crescent Counter, and it will never trigger Lunar Punishment. And of the two of them, Lunar Punishment being 2 to 2.5 times stronger against the same enemies, why waste 6 slots on Crescent Counter? Instead, build his defenses with those other 2 sets, then totally ignore the whole buff and debuff. He's got enough health that he can actually wait his way through damage over time effects. He also has enough. He's got enough offense and some naturally flanking and naturally seeking abilities that making him bypass protect, making him bypass stealthy, maybe not so big of a deal if you're using him primarily as a tank. Because he brings buffs and debuffs as well as his attacks, even if he can't target an enemy because they're all stealthy at the time, he still has actions he can do. His tactical is defensive. If he can't attack the enemy, throw a shield on yourself. Why not? Belligerent comes from PvP. That makes it somewhat hard to collect. If you're lucky enough to get your hands on it, especially high-value crystals, throw them on Moon Knight. We've already seen that Lunar Punishment benefits from Clobbered, it benefits from Off-Balanced, and it's that Off-Balanced that is really telling. If Lunar Punishment benefits from Off-Balanced, then it should benefit from Belligerent. That 50% bonus to free attack damage on an ability that hits harder than almost any other ability he has. Watcher, followed by Lunar Punishment, will be damage equal to or greater than that very last 3-star ability that has Brutal Strike and Guardian Maneuver if used in that same round. We've expanded on the EISO sets, maybe a little bit too much. We've really gone into them. Let's look at builds. I gave 3 when I did this post, and I did them not too long ago. I have tried them out. Let's look at some potential DPS build, followed by a potential tank build, followed by what I originally called the Moon Knight special. But personally, I like the phrase one of the other repliers there did. I believe it was Pan Tribble. Props to whoever said it. I believe it was Pan Tribble. I will correct myself in the comment below if I go back and look and find out that I got that wrong. where he called it the Moonlight Special. That's what I'm calling it from here on out, and it's the combination I use right now, and I love it. But let's look at a DPS build for him first. Let's make use of the Watcher aspect with Crescent Dart. This will give him stealthy if he doesn't have Revealed. If you get Watcher back to back, he'll enter stealth with the first one, he'll break stealth with the second one, just like any other stealthy character. Now, of note, and they did confirm it for me, and I actually think it was Pantriple who confirmed it as well. It was in the same post it was in his same reply as the answer to the last one. If he uses Crescent Dart on Watcher and enters stealthy, the Lunar Punishment follow-up to Crescent Dart will not immediately break stealth. It's not his natural free attack, it follows different rules. Which is really strange because in a lot of ways it follows all the normal other free attack rules. Let's swap this out. Let's give him a purely offensive ability. Specifically, let's give him Strike Fear. This is one of his highest base damage attacks. Can already target stealthy characters by default. Gains its bonus if the target has a mental debuff, and this means that at no point is he required to defend in order to get the most out of this move. Instead, debuffing the enemy is all he needs to do. Now, Moon Knight himself, he does have a move that lets him debuff without protecting. We won't use that. Instead, we'll use Strike Fear's already high damage of 332 plus Seeking as his primary source of damage. And remember, you're using this on Pathfinder. It is going to trigger that follow-up attack, even with that minus 50, even if it doesn't have Exploit Turmoil. The fact that it follows up with Lunar Punishment means you're going to get a very solid chunk of damage. If your team is capable of applying mental debuffs, if you have someone who likes to throw out Intimidate, Strike Fear just gets even stronger. Over here, we're going to give something to make use of that Embracer aspect. If you're not using him for protection in any way, shape, or form, then his ability to apply a shield to himself this tactical isn't quite so useful. Use Khonshu's Blessing. At 4-star, it's also very fast. It's just as good as his shield. And while it gives him stealthy too, because you know what, stealthy is great when you're doing an offensive character, it gives everybody confident. Let him put confident on himself with Khonshu's Blessing. Watch for that very next Pathfinder attack and throw in Strike Fear. He'll do fantastic damage, and Confident will, like I said, he's got a fairly average accuracy. His accuracy is not bad. He does have that, keep in mind, he does have that one yellow EISO slot, and his accuracy is increased by his leadership bonus as well. He can land some hits. He really can. Do this as a pure damage build if you've got a strong tank, especially if you're using someone like Luke Cage or Captain America, who can apply clobbered and or off-balanced in any way, shape, or form in your team. This allows Moon Knight to do a very immense amount of single target damage consistently. It's not even burst. As soon as he gets Watcher or Pathfinder, he's going to hit very hard. And if he doesn't have those, if he gets Embracer or if he gets Defender, he's going to buff the entire team with Confident, and everybody's damage is going up for a round. Why not? It works really well. This is actually how I used Moon Knight when I first built him up to 30, when I was still trying to get his star level up, because I had another tank who could simply take the hits much better. Once Moon Knight hits level 30, especially once his star levels start to hit 2 and 3, and you get a better team, Moon Knight can actually start to tank content for you. It is possible to level up with tanking. It's more difficult. The fact that he can't raise his defense on his own means you really need to have some kind of a healer or support specialist with him. Somebody who can either give Fortified to the team. Captain Marvel can do that, I believe. Do something to kind of build his defenses through the use of a support tactician. I used MODOK actually for a little while with Moon Knight. MODOK's ability to shield the entire team and then give them all focused. MODOK's support abilities, they pair really well for Moon Knight in terms of survival. It is actually a fun combination to try. Let's swap him out. Let's make him full tank. There are two combinations you can do for this that work pretty well. First, we're going to give him an ability to generate Protect, and then we're going to give him some kind of a guardian maneuver. Now, here you have a choice. Lunar Legionnaire is a faster attack, 265 damage, normal speed, um, already bypasses protected targets. Compared to Fist of Khonshu, this would be my choice between them. 298 damage, slightly higher. Slow speed, so slightly lower there, but it's brutal. So it's going to do more damage at a slower speed. The one thing I will say, if you use Fist of Khonshu, while it's great damage in a burst, it's not fast enough to keep you from potentially losing the protect buff. Protection can fall off. And if you're running him pure tank, you don't want that. Now, for the last move, my suggestion then would be another variant of an attack. You may not find yourself using it all that much. Probably not Strike Fear. This would probably be a good candidate for when you want to bring in, say, Crescent Crusader. Throw up Susceptible, throw up Dazed. Give them as trigger your follow-up attack, and maybe use Fist of Khonshu as a big finishing move, kind of an effect in there. If you really, really want to, you can bring this. Keep in mind that Stealthy breaks Protect, removes it. I find this to be something of an inefficient build, and I find it because his only choice for Embracer is his tactical, and if he's already got a shield up, that's kind of a waste. My real suggestion, if you're going to run him as a tank, is not his club. It's the debuff that I use. This can be thrown on any round where you have Defender or Embracer and will benefit from both. Being very fast at 4-star, and I want it at 4-star, allows him to sneak this in whenever needed, to throw Intimidated across the enemy line. With that 80% chance, it's very rare that anything less than 2 enemies get hit by it. More often than not, it's all the enemies. Keeps protection up. Makes for a good pair with this, with Fist of Khonshu, because you don't have conflict for Pathfinder anymore. In this case, a Guardian Maneuver, Fist of Khonshu, or Lunar Legionnaire, they can be used for Pathfinder or Defender. Remember that Defender is not manually triggered, and so any ability can be used on Defender's round and will work just fine, because the free attack comes whenever they hit you. Making sure you have the Protect status up is the important part. So this gives us an Embracer, a Pathfinder, and again, if you're running him full tank, just like when you're running him full offense and the Defender aspect kind of gets ignored unless an AoE kicks in, Watcher kind of gets ignored if you're running him as a full tank, and this is the reason for the third and final big build, the one that I use right now, the one that I believe Pan Triple said that he uses, and this is that Moonlight special. This is Moon Knight at his most random, and this works well on content where this works with a team who can increase their own survivability in different ways. MODOK's ability to shield the entire team while granting Inspire, so everybody's defenses and effective health goes up. Iron Fist group heal, plus the ability to remove debuffs from the entire team. Tough characters, Drax, Thor, Hulk and She-Hulk. Other people who are not necessarily primary tanks or support tacticians who can actually take hits. If you're going with a group like that where you only want to protect, where you can benefit from only protecting either half the time, 3/4 of the time, something like that, this is where this build comes in, and it's a whole lot of fun. And it's actually the combination of abilities you see right here. Now, for my own ease of mind, I kind of swap them around some, but that's just that's old habit. If you set it up like this, it does follow the same order as his lunatic path. So if you're using him as a leader like I tend to do, this makes more sense for people who are borrowing him who've never used him before. Anytime that you have Defender or Embracer, fight or flight. Now, if you're running him as a full Defender, go ahead and throw his tactical whenever you see an Embracer, heal him back up, but when the fight starts, and especially if you've got the benefit of that Impenetrable EISO set, go ahead and throw fight or flight. Start it off with that. Intimidate the enemies, give yourself protecting. Fist of Khonshu or Lunar Legionnaire, your choice for Pathfinder. Another option is, while I'm using that right now, Strike Fear works really well with this build, and it does so because it doesn't require you to have protection up. As long as you've hit the enemy line with Fight or Flight at some point, even if you've since let Protect wear off or use the Watcher debuff, or use the Watcher aspect and given yourself stealth and broken Protect, as long as you've intimidated the enemies at some point in time, Strike Fear will get its damage bonus. Fist of Khonshu requires protection to be up and active at that point in time. That said, because of its brutal strike capability and because of the sheer power of that Pathfinder follow-up, even if protection's down, not a big deal. That 50% damage bonus from Guardian only affects Fist of Khonshu, has no benefit to Lunar Punishment. Lunar Punishment will still do more than half. Lunar Punishment will still be half the damage for that round. Its damage will equal Fist of Khonshu. Mix that in there with Crescent Counter. You want that ability to cover for your ranged effects. Now, if you want to make him maybe a little bit more defensive than offensive in that same build, remember that his free attack is perhaps his greatest single source of damage. So just triggering that is good enough to keep his damage really high. You can swap this around a little bit. You can take Nightclub. You can take Khonshu's Blessing, and you can take Crescent Darts. And the reason you're taking this combination, use Nightclub whenever Pathfinder or Defender pops up. At 4 stars, it's a fast ability. Use Khonshu's Blessing whenever Embracer pops up. Don't use it for Defender, use it with Embracer. It is a move that can grant you Stealthy. It's very fast at 4 stars. Crescent Dart, fast at 3 stars, also applies Stealthy. Frequently what you'll do with this particular combination, you'll enter Stealth and then break it. And you'll do so very rapidly, so that you're often stuck with a revealed debuff. This means that when you do use Nightclub with Defender or Pathfinder, and immediately get, say, the Watcher debuff or the Watcher aspect again, you can throw a Crescent Dart without losing your Protect status. You'll go into Stealth almost immediately after revealed breaks, and this gives you that occasional time to try to stop and recover your health. This is maybe a little bit more defensive for the team as a whole. It's a little more support. His personal damage is still going to be respectable because you're still playing to Lunar Punishment. He doesn't have his individual high damage moves like Fist of Khonshu. Instead, he has speed. Fast. You know, very fast. Very fast. Like, he doesn't even have a normal speed move in this combination. He's going to get his turns with a reasonable quickness. He's going to cycle his aspect every time he gets one of those turns, and this combination will trigger that powerful Lunar Punishment free attack more frequently than his other builds will, because the only way to get more Lunar Punishments is to take more turns. He's sacrificing the damage on the primary ability in order to increase the number of those powerful free attacks that he gets, while at the same time including a team-wide confidence buff, because why not? Because reasons. We're going to call it good there. We've cycled through a lot of builds for him. This is a character I use frequently, and I cycle the abilities that I get on him because he can fill roles in all kinds of different teams. This one, with a melee attack, with a range attack, with the team-wide confidence buff, he can slot into pretty much any team. Throw out team-wide rampaging, he can benefit. Throw out team-wide sharpshooting, he can benefit. He can trigger bleeds. He can work with Clobbered. His free attack follow-up works. His free attack follow-up works with Clobbered. His melee attack for Pathfinder works for Crushed. This is a good swap-in build, and more importantly, because this does not require his 3-star. In fact, it only requires you to purchase a single ability for him. One 2-star ability. Other than that, it's two of his starting moves, Crescent Dart and Nightclub. He gets those like right off the bat.
when you first unlock him. This build is highly effective and should be considered highly effective even while leveling for newer players who draw Moon Knight in that early combination of heroes who can who don't necessarily have a reliable tank, who definitely don't have a reliable healer because healers are really rare. There's only really two of them. Um, this is a way for Moon Knight to act as a core frontliner and spread damage among your team before you get those core specialists as you're leveling your characters up. By spreading damage among your team, if you don't have a tank, if you don't have a dedicated healer, or even if you do have a healer, if you did like I did and get Spider Woman way before you got Iron Fist, even though I didn't get her until much closer to level 30, um, this is a way to spread damage among your team by tanking some of the time and being in stealth some of the time, splitting it back and forth. That keeps your heroes alive longer through more waves and actually lets you clear that early content without the need of a healer. I have tried this. I've tried this combination. I have used him in fights where I didn't bring a tank, and that's what he does. He splits damage among the team. If you bring a character who does party support in one way or another, Captain Marvel is a fairly common early character. She does team-wide support. Her ability to grant things like frenzy to the entire team and such. Look into some of her defensive moves for the team-wide buffs and pair them with Moon Knight, and you'll find that the team as a whole all take damage, but they all take less. And this can help you clear early content while you're still building your hero collection. Um, Moon Knight was the topic of today's Pure Theory Crafting, not because he's a rare hero, but because he's a complex one with a lot of variety. He's a hybrid character in a game that's not kind to hybrids, uh, and yet because of that powerful lunar punishment, because of that niche specialty in his free attacks, he can function equally well on several teams and excels on free attack teams with characters who can apply off balance to the enemy. Iron Fist, Age of Ultron, Black Widow. She's a fairly common hero, a little more common than Iron Fist is, I believe. Um, Characters who can do that and set them up. Star-Lord, he does it too. You're going to find that Moon Knight does a very solid, very respectable amount of damage while keeping your team alive, kind of at the sake of his own health, and then skipping that, breaking that with his stealth, and then healing himself back up and shielding him before he steps back out into protection again a round or two later. With that, we'll call it good for today. My thanks for the people who commented and kind of gave some feedback on that last video from last night. There were a couple of quick comments on there. They did confirm that there are some problems with the insight resource bar. Specifically, we have noticed that particular bug on iOS. I can't confirm or deny Android because that one wasn't tested per se. I've never had an insight problem on Windows 10. I had it this morning on my phone, testing it on my phone, and uh, I've already gotten feedback that yes, definitely has some issues over on iOS. I hope they fix that for Agent 13. This was the last of the 4 Pure Theory Crafting videos, 4 posts that were already completed. I have already selected a couple of heroes to kind of be the topics for upcoming Pure Theory Crafting. When those come out, expect a post and a video in the same day. Maybe not quite simultaneous because they both take let's be honest, they both take a couple hours to put together. I'm not the fastest typer. I rewatch this entire video as soon as it's done, so you're talking about 2 hours worth of actual recording even before I upload it. This kind of stuff is fun to me. I enjoy it. I hope you enjoy it too. I hope this gives you inclination to use Moon Knight if you've got him. He's not an uncommon character. A lot of you do, but maybe not a lot of you have really touched him and tested him and seen what you can do with him in your builds. Give him a try. I used him as my primary tank to completely clear the Iron Man side of the Spec Ups, up to and including the Epic Boss, at 3-star level 30. He's viable. He can do it. Until next time, until I have that next hero worked out, there will be a little bit longer of a delay. This will not be an everyday thing just because of that. Until that time, this is I, Hoagland. I am out.